from wherever you found it. And welcome to this discussion, which I expect to be lively. The way that this panel is going to proceed is I'd like to frame the issue and then turn to our panelists, Mark Levine, Julie Keller, and Paul Friedman. They will each give approximately 10-minute presentations. And then I will pose a couple of questions, and then we'll take your questions. I would appreciate it if you would put your questions in the chat. I will be moderating that and present the questions with attribution. So that's, there are various ways of running one of these, moderating one of these. This is, we'd like to think, the most efficient. The call is recorded, and then at the conclusion of the formal presentation, you can stay on, and everybody will be unmuted. It becomes a bit more for those who like. Mark and Julian and Paul have agreed to stay for a bit. Before we conclude, there will be. Ask Catherine Allen to give some closing remarks on behalf of the Social Action Committee. So let me set the frame. This is a discussion about gun violence prevention, and we're talking about that and not gun control. These are not the same topic, and these discussions are always charged. I expect that after the events of the last 2 weeks, this issue is even more charged and emotional on several levels. But let me frame the contours of our discussions today, and you may understand why I say it's a discussion about gun violence prevention and not specifically gun control. First, from a legal perspective, the Second Amendment to the U.S. Constitution provides, quote, a well-regulated militia, comma, got to get those Oxford commas in, even if it's not an Oxford comma, being necessary to the security of a free state, comma, the right of the people to keep and bear arms, comma, shall not be infringed, close quote. This is an amendment to the United States Constitution, and as part of our federal system spells out a limitation on the power of the federal government with respect to the right to bear arms. In the D.C. District of Columbia versus Heller Supreme Court decision of 2008, Justice Scalia's majority decision found that the district could not prohibit private ownership of guns. The opinion is complex, as are the dissents, but at least my reading of the decision is that it starts with the phrase of the right of the people, a phrase used in the First and Fourth Amendments as well. As an aside, several weeks ago, in the reading of Parshat Bamidbar, describing the census that Moses took of the tribes, he was required to identify the number of males who could bear arms. That's just an aside. While many dispute the correctness of the decision, it is the law. But Justice Scalia also said two other things quite clearly. First, that the right to bear arms individually is for defensive purposes. Second, that such right is subject to regulation, and he cited a Supreme Court decision upholding a law prohibiting sawed-off shotguns. Note that guns clearly present a danger. They're designed to kill. States have the inherent power to enact reasonable regulations to protect the public order and health, as we are currently experiencing with respect to the COVID-19 pandemic. And the very fact that we are holding this conference by Zoom rather than in person at the synagogue. And it is within that established right that states, such as the Commonwealth of Virginia, have enacted laws placing restrictions on the sale of guns and permitting authorities to take guns in specific situations. It's also within the power of the United States Congress under the Constitution to enact regulations. There is a second perspective, not the legal perspective. People die in a variety of situations by gunshot. When numbers of people die in a common way, it becomes a matter of public health concern. There are more guns in this country by numbers or per capita than many other countries. Many of us, including me, have lost family members to suicide by gun. The fact that guns present a troubled person with an immediate way either to threaten others or to harm themselves is a health risk, While we can quibble about the fact that people harm themselves and others with a variety of mechanisms, the fact remains that guns are a uniquely instantaneous and effective weapon of death as well as protection. It is in that spirit of focusing on gun violence protection rather than gun control that this panel has been constructed. And it is no small coincidence that June is Gun Violence Prevention Month. First, Mark Levine, whom many of you know, was elected in 2015 to represent the 45th Delegate District of Virginia, Alexandria, Arlington, and Fairfax, which also contain a large number of our congregants. Mark has a record of crafting progressive legislation at the local, state, and federal level that spans 3 decades. Mark is dedicated to turning the progressive ideals of our community into laws that help people and advance justice for all Americans. Mark is a passionate advocate for all women and children, particularly those who are survivors of domestic violence and sexual assault. Following the murder of his sister by her husband, Mark fought for 10 years to bring his ex-brother-in-law to justice and for his parents to obtain custody of his sister's 2 children so they would not grow up with the man who murdered their mother. Mark is one of 2 openly gay members of the House of Delegates. Julie Keller is an original Million Mom Marcher, is co-leader and outreach vice president of the Northern Virginia chapter of Brady United and a core member of the DC area Interfaith Gun Violence Prevention Network. She's involved in activism and lobbying both at the federal and state level, and is a frequent participant in monthly vigils at the National Rifle Association headquarters in Fairfax. Julie has a special interest in gun suicide prevention. Paul Friedman is a well-known activist in our area and is executive director of Safer Country, a nonprofit group designed to keep guns away from people in crisis. Now, if I may, I'd like to turn the podium over to Mark.
Thank you, David. Thank you to everyone at Agudas. I'm sorry I can't be there in person. I'm sorry none of us can. I look forward to the day when once again we will meet in person. I do think it's a sort of a better way to do things. But hey, it's great that we're doing this. When I was asked to speak in person at the synagogue 3 months ago, the issue of gun violence and proper gun regulation was the biggest issue in Virginia. It was in all the newspapers. Everybody was talking about it, and there's lots of protests about it, the whole thing. And frankly, I fully expected by the time June rolled around that this would still be the big topic in everyone's minds. Obviously, it's not the case, with 110,000 Americans dead so far from the novel coronavirus, with protests in our streets in every one of the 50 states, including me. I was in DC yesterday protesting against systemic racism and police brutality. There are other things on people's minds. But let's walk back though, because had these things not happened, I still think gun regulation would probably be the biggest issue. And we did a lot this session. Virginia was one of the worst states in the nation with regard to gun regulation. Okay, worst, that's my pejorative term because I think we needed more gun regulation. But if you just rate it from sort of 0 to 100 in terms of all the things we could have done or were doing in Virginia, I'd say we were about at a 5. One of the lowest amounts of gun regulation in the United States. Virginia guns were found all up and down the East Coast. We were the gun runners for the whole Northeast because the whole Northeast had stricter gun regulations than we did. We came a long way this session. I would say we went from 5 out of 100 to 55 or 60. So I would say we're better than most states, but note that I still feel that we have a way to go. I don't say 95. We are definitely some things we need to do, and hopefully we'll get to that later in the discussion. But let me tell you what we did do, so you know how far we've gone. The governor of Virginia, Governor Northam, in 2019, last year, seems like a million years ago, but just a year ago, called us into special session after the Virginia Beach shooting, mass shooting, and asked us to pass 8 gun bills. The Republicans who controlled General Assembly at the time said, nope, gun laws are perfect, we're not going to change them. End of the session. it was nice that they gave us 90 minutes to give a few speeches before they did. But the drive down to Richmond took longer than our entire session, the summer of 19. These same 8 gun bills came back this year from the governor. I introduced one of them. It was on assault weapons, and 7 of the 8 passed. The only one that didn't was my bill, the one on assault weapons, and we'll get to that in a minute. But let me quickly talk about the other 7 that did pass. And also, it wasn't just those 7, there were some other gun bills as well. I'll try to be brief, but again, I know you'll have good questions, and I'm happy to go into any detail on any of these bills that you want me to. Universal background checks, critical. Closing the gun show loophole, basically saying that everyone who wants to buy a gun has to go through a background check. Now, some 60% of Virginians did go through background checks because they bought their guns at gun stores, which are federally licensed dealers, but some 40% didn't. They could buy them by meeting someone based on an online or a gun show or a friend or in the back alley, and it was all perfectly legal to sell guns to people with large criminal records and people who have been declared mentally incompetent, and someone could have a long record. They could be a known gang member, terrorist, and it's perfectly legal to sell them a gun. That all changes. And by the way, we're still the worst in the nation, or one of the worst right now. The law is going to affect July 1st. Today's June 7th. So they actually have, none of these laws have gone into effect yet. They all go into effect in 3 weeks and 3 days. Okay, universal background checks, gun violence protective orders, critical. Really good legislation passed in a number of states, including conservative states like Florida after the shooting down there. What gun violence protective orders do is they allow us to see if someone is dangerous and to take a gun away from them with due process, full due process, court proceedings. But if they are, to me, some 2/3, we don't talk about this a lot, not quite 2/3, 60 to 65% of all of the 40,000 people killed by a gun in the United States, 40,000 plus, in America every year, 60 to 65% are suicides. And gun violence protective orders do a lot to protect people from themselves. People who like to have guns in the home should know, statistics show that a gun in the home is 5 times more likely to be used against the gun owner or a member of the gun owner's family than it is against some outside intruder. And a large number of these are suicides. So what gun violence protective orders do, also known as red flag laws, is if you see someone threatening their own life, threatening someone else's life, you can go call the police. They take you to court, and they can take away your gun. Another example of a great use of a gun violence protective order is in South Carolina, when the killer down there was drunk, had a gun, and said that he wanted to kill a bunch of black people. His friend took away his gun to keep him from doing the act, and then realized that under South Carolina law, that was theft. It was illegal to remove the gun from someone threatening to kill a bunch of people. So he returned his gun to his friend, who promptly went into the AME church in South Carolina, prayed for about an hour, and then shot virtually everyone in that room. This would help prevent that. Third, in importance, I would say, although they're all important, is allowing localities to enact firearms ordinances. This is really important. We know that in Old Town, 6 guys with assault weapons, large, massive, the kind that can kill, as in Dayton, Ohio, some 50 people in 30 seconds or some number like that, paraded them around our farmers market. And you may remember that it was last year. Again, it seems like much longer ago, but people screamed and ran and dropped things, and our business was down about 80%. They called the police, and the police said, "Oh, I'm sorry, we can't do anything about it." They have every right to come into our farmers market, and our wonderful, peaceful farmers market with children and jam and dogs and produce, and terrorize us, which is what they did. I'm told they didn't even buy anything. They came all the way from Hopewell, these people. That's about 2.5 hours from here. And just for fun, one of their leaders actually came and paid me a visit to my house after threatening me, and came with his big gun and stood outside my window in the park outside my house. What this bill does, thank God, is it allows localities to pass ordinances to regulate guns. Doesn't go as far, frankly, as I wanted it to. It doesn't really allow them in the streets. It just allows them in parks and public buildings. It got watered down by the Senate, but it's still a long way, and I look forward to the day when it will be illegal for a guy to stand outside my house with a gun. Number 4 is the 1 gun a month laws. This largely prevents gun trafficking. I'm not sure why you would need 10 guns today. It allows a gun a month. This was Virginia law for many years, I should say, was repealed when the Republicans took over, and we brought it back. There's protections for children, raising the penalty from a class 3 to a class 1 misdemeanor for anyone who recklessly leaves a loaded gun unsecured so as to endanger the life of a child under the age of 14. There's a requirement to report lost or stolen guns to the police within 48 hours. This also helps track missing guns. Again, why wouldn't a responsible gun owner want to report a stolen gun to police? The last was a very important one, a bill to ban weapons from those subject to a permanent protective order. So if someone commits domestic violence, goes through due process, gets a permanent protective order against them, you can take away their weapons. Those weren't the only gun bills we passed, though. One of the ones that was my favorite is that now to get a concealed carry permit, you actually have to have some training. Under current Virginia law, you pass a 10-question multiple choice test that they give you the answers to. So really any 4-year-old can pass the test, because if you get it wrong, you just write down what the right answers are, and then you take it again, and you've passed the test within a minute or two. No more. Now you actually have to know, I don't know, which side of the gun the bullet comes out of before you handle a gun, at least before you get a concealed carry permit. We still have open carry laws. We still have a lot to do. I hope we get on what we still have to do. We have laws exempting gun safe purchases from sales tax. I always thought that was amazing. Republicans opposed making it get a tax cut for gun owners. They opposed a tax cut for gun owners because it made it safer to keep guns. Never understood their opposition. That passed. We also are giving parents at least 24 hours prior notice of lockdown drills. The one bill of the governor's that did not pass was mine. It was clearly the most controversial. It was the assault weapons ban. To be clear, my bill did not actually ban existing guns in people's homes. They could keep their AK-47s. You just couldn't buy new ones in Virginia. After a year, it also banned high-capacity magazines. That bill drew so much attention, so much opposition, and brought a gunman to my home, that I like to think of it as the feint at Normandy. That I'm like, look over here, hate Mark Levine, he's trying, and then quick, get those other gun bills through, right? I kind of felt that way. So even though it passed the House and died in the Senate, and even though I do want to bring it back, the controversy over that bill, I do think allowed some of these other bills to get through, and I'm proud of that. I know we're going to have a longer discussion. I would love to go into the Second Amendment issues that David rose. I guess I'll leave that aside for now, because I get into a whole discourse on why I disagree with Heller, but why Heller still doesn't prohibit any of the things we did. To be clear, every single bill that we introduced has been introduced in other states and has been found constitutional, including the assault weapons bill that I tried to pass. So every one of them is declared constitutional. You can disagree with the Supreme Court. You can think they're too liberal. I obviously don't think that. But that actually was not the issue. The Constitution was not an issue. The issue was the wisdom of the bills we passed, all of which I think were wise. Many were watered down in the Senate. For those of you who don't know, in House of Delegates, we have 55 out of 100 Democrats. In the Senate, there's 21 out of 40. That means that we can lose 4 of our members on a bill and still pass it. They can lose 1. So that extra little leeway matters. And because of that, the Senate did water down a lot of these bills. Again, this is full of detail, and I'm happy to go into more detail, but for now, I think I'll be quiet and move on to Paul Friedman or Julie. I don't know who's next.
Thanks, Mark. Julie, if you would.
Sure. First of all, I'd like to say that I think Mark is being very humble. We and Virginia advocates have been thrilled with what we got accomplished this year. 7 out of 8 bills. We're sorry we didn't get the assault weapons bill, but to amplify what Mark said, none of us are trying to get rid of guns. None of us are trying to abolish the Second Amendment. I think that's a really important thing to remember, because the other side will say that we're trying to take away everybody's gun rights. There's a very strong belief that assault weapons don't have any protective purpose, are not useful for hunting. And I think that people can still own enough guns to keep themselves safe from an intruder without owning an assault weapon. But a little about me. I've been a member of Agudas Achim for about 30 years, and probably anybody who knows me even a little bit knows that gun violence prevention is my passion. I first became involved in this movement when the Million Mom March happened about 20 years ago. That you may remember, that was in response to the shooting of a bunch of little kids at the Jewish Community Center in Los Angeles. After that, I kind of kept my activism down to a minimum, but it was always an important issue to me, being a mom and being a person who cares about the safety of other people. And it was always one of my top issues in deciding who I voted for. Fast forward to December of 2012, that horrible day when 26 and 7-year-olds were murdered at Sandy Hook Elementary School and 6 of their educators, and I knew I had to get more involved. So I shopped around for groups, and I became active in what was then the Brady campaign. The Brady campaign is best known for the passage of the Brady background checks bill, which keeps people with felony, or at least for the most part, keep people who have felony convictions or extreme mental health issues from legally buying a gun. This legislation has been phenomenally effective. It's estimated that about 3 million prohibited purchases have been stopped by this legislation. As Mark mentioned, there were huge loopholes in that bill, some of which didn't even apply when it was passed into law in 1992. Like, there was no internet to buy a gun from. Now, quite a few people buy guns through the internet or through private sellers. In Virginia, we now have closed that loophole. We very much would like to do that nationally. All of these things are far more effective if they're on a national level, obviously. We also are in favor of the assault weapons bill, which Mark unfortunately didn't get passed this year, but we still have hope for, in the extreme risk protection laws. Also recently, I've become interested in gun violence as a faith issue. I'm one of the core members of a DC area interfaith group, gun violence prevention group, which represents churches, synagogues, temples, mosques around the area. I'll talk a little more later, but I think that gun violence prevention is very much a faith issue. And working in this group has allowed me to advocate with people that tend to be on the other side of the political spectrum, like evangelical groups. I've advocated with a man named Reverend Rob Shank, who was very active in the pro-life movement, and said, you know what, you can't be pro-life and pro-gun. So that's been very interesting. And another thing about the faith outreach is it allows us to reach communities of color who probably rightfully so think that our mainstream gun violence prevention measures don't address specific issues in their communities, like police gun violence. This is something that both of the groups that I'm part of are very much interested in becoming more involved in. And I also wanted to talk a little bit about gun suicide. Mark gave a very good introduction, but many people don't see gun suicide as violence, but it certainly is. about 2/3 of all gun deaths are suicide. Tragically, about 11 veterans a day commit suicide by gun. And in the last 10 years, about 200,000 Americans have lost their life to gun violence. You may have seen in the Washington Post a couple of weeks ago an op-ed by a Baltimore rabbi who was shocked by how easy it was for one of his depressed congregants to buy a gun with the attempt of committing suicide. I'll share a link to that once I stop talking. Why are guns so much more dangerous than other forms of suicide? Well, unfortunately, guns are extremely effective. About 95% of people who attempt their lives with a gun don't live to see another day, whereas most of the other forms, like taking pills, are only about 5% of people die, and they can move on and get the help that they need. Also, suicide tends to be a very impulsive action, and almost half of people who try suicide do it within 10 minutes of the first impulse. If they didn't have that gun available, they wouldn't have been able to take their lives with it. Like I said, not trying to take guns away from everybody. People have a right to have a gun in their home, but it has to be realized that if you have somebody with mental health issues, with suicidal ideations, there's really no safe way to have a gun in the home, even if it's safely stored, even if the bullets are stored separately. It is a risk. What else do I have to say? And again, since suicides are impulsive, if you have a child in the home who gets into a fight with their boyfriend and decides they don't want to live anymore, if that gun is available, that the most horrible tragedy you can imagine. So that's my happy thoughts.
Okay, thanks, Julie. Paul?
Well, thank you very much. I want to thank the Agudas Achim Men's Club and the Social Action Committee for hosting this forum this morning, particularly Elliot Parkin, Elliot, and Catherine Allen, I presume will be joining us soon. I want to thank Mark and Julie for their excellent presentations and for being part of this forum as well. I want to thank David for moderating it, and I'm honored to be part of this. It's such an important issue, and really it gets more important every day. Again, I'm the founder and executive director of Safer. I have a personal stake in gun violence. In late November 1981, after finishing a stint as an intern for then Representative Chuck Schumer, and months before I would begin law school the following year, I was on vacation in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. While there, I learned that one great aunt and another uncle and aunt were nearby on their vacation. I arranged to have lunch with them and had a wonderful time, particularly with my great aunt Elizabeth. She was 83. A few days later, on December 1st, my aunt Elizabeth was shot to death when a bullet was fired through a door in the adjoining hotel room where she was staying in Miami that was being burglarized. In 2016, after working in law and politics and nonprofits for many years here in Washington, the opportunity was presented to become the executive director of a nonprofit created by the families of the victims of the Virginia Tech tragedy on April 16th. I was honored to be considered, and I felt moved to take on that role without having any particular connection to Virginia Tech, but having had my own experience to draw upon. With VTV Family Outreach Foundation, I created Campaign 32 to improve the reporting of names of people who've been found to be a danger to themselves or others That reporting is done to both Virginia's background check system and NICS, the National Instant Criminal Background Check System, gun purchases. That was referred to earlier by Julie, created by the Brady campaign, their efforts. The failure to include the name of the Virginia Tech shooter in that system, as it has in a number of other tragedies, allowed him to buy his guns and kill 32 people, injure 17 others by gunfire. As well, on behalf of VTV, I worked with the city of Alexandria and Virginia Tech's local graduate program to create a tree grove in Chinkapin Park here in Alexandria to honor the victims and the survivors of that tragedy. In 2019, due to the VTV's desire to move away from gun violence prevention and to trying to assist people who've been injured, I established Safer Country and expanded the mission beyond that where I began with VTV. I discovered that in Virginia alone, tens of thousands of people convicted of felonies had not been entered into Virginia's background checks or the FBI's. As well, many other states had a similar backlog due to technological and staffing issues. Beyond that, I realized that we could also help bring attention to other related issues, such as advancing the new red flag or extreme risk protection order laws that have been growing around the country. We will now be the 18th state to pass such a law, including the District of Columbia. It also helped with safer storage laws to prevent children from accessing weapons and requiring fingerprints at point of sale to ensure that prohibited persons are not getting access to legally. Essentially, our mission could be summed up by working to keep guns out of unsafe hands. Now, of note, on June 25th, Thursday, June 25th, I'll be moderating a panel for Safer Country on Zoom, which originally was scheduled for an in-person event, but it's on Zoom now to discuss Virginia's new red flag law. The panelists will include Representative Don Beyer to talk about his work on a national level, Delegate Rip Sullivan, who introduced the law in the House level and the state level, Alexandria's Police Chief Michael Brown, and Alexandria's Commonwealth's Attorney Brian Porter. Although we've discussed briefly the importance of this new law this morning, implementation is far more complicated than it appears on the surface. For months, I've been participating in the National ERPO Working Group phone calls, that's the Extreme Risk Protection Order Working Group, and hearing about issues from around the nation. I've learned quite a bit about how different communities enforce the law, implement the law, and it's quite spotty and different around the country. So I think this will be an interesting, in-depth discussion on June 25th. So we've just gone through a very difficult period, and we're continuing to go through it every day. The connection between guns and race goes back to the very formation of the Second Amendment. And we've talked about the most recent interpretation of that amendment by the Supreme Court, but we have to remember that it was really Virginia that is most responsible for the creation of the Second Amendment. And our governor at the time, Patrick Henry, we have two streets in Alexandria, one is Patrick and one is Henry, and they go in different directions. And coincidentally, Patrick Henry was a man who fought for liberty when it came to the Revolution. But when it came to slavery, he was the largest slaveholder when he was governor of our state, our first governor of Virginia. And it was his assessment of the new Constitution, and particularly Article 1, Section 8, that indicated the federal government would be taking control over state militia. And he recognized the danger of that to states because they used their state militia in the South to prevent the slave revolts and to control slavery. It was that recognition that he brought to the debate as to whether Virginia would enter and vote for the new Constitution and in 1887 through 1889. And while Virginia did vote, was one of the last states to vote and put the Constitution over the top, his debate on that issue with James Madison, convinced James Madison, who had political ambitions of his own in the state and ultimately became president, that he needed to create an amendment among the Bill of Rights that would address Governor Henry's concerns, which is why the Second Amendment was created, to ensure that states would have control over their militia. And that's why the phrase state, the word state, is in the Second Amendment. Very unusual word to find. It was originally supposed to be country, but it became state because it was very important to them. States could retain that control. So guns and race go back to the very formation of the Second Amendment, go back to the founding of our country. And we are continuing to fight this issue today as to what we will do about this connection. And so on that note, I will say that once again, I'm very proud to be part of this experience this morning. I look forward to any questions, and thank you for.
Thank you. Thanks, Paul. Thank all three of you. Let me take a little bit of the moderator's privilege also. You should know that with my practice as a law school professor, I get to be devil's advocate to a certain extent as well. And I was going to pick up on an issue that has also shown up in the chat. Let me preface the question on assault weapons with a little story. Back in January, I got supremely torqued off by the actions of the was it Virginia Civil Defense League that was racing around places in Virginia asking localities to adopt sanctuary city resolutions because of the expectation that the changed Virginia legislature, the newly democratically controlled legislature, would pass gun control laws. And this offended me in so many different ways. I wrote a letter and took aim at, so to speak, at that, but also the issue of assault weapons and semi-automatic weapons. And in the responses I got back, I got quite an education about what a semi-automatic weapon is and the distinction between what is semi-automatic versus what is assault. We think about firearms that have large capacity magazines, which have been identified as a separate issue, and bump stocks we've heard about in the wake of Las Vegas, which has supposedly been addressed to some extent by the federal government, believe it or not. But there's this question about what is an assault weapon. One of the questions in the chat suggests that the difficulty in defining what an assault weapon is, as opposed to a small handgun, a handgun that reloads automatically, for example, is perhaps what led to the failure of Delegate Levine's bill to pass. So if each of you could address the question of what you mean and what you think is understood by the term assault weapon, I think that would help us all.
Well, I guess I should start then. So assault weapon is a legal definition, and it can be defined however we want it to be defined. There was a defining way in the, there was an assault weapons ban, a federal assault weapons ban. It existed from 1994 to 2004. That was actually quite effective. Mass shootings did not stop, but went down about 40%. You might say, well, only 40%? Well, that's still a lot of lives saved. But basically, it gets really technical. And one of the things I found that the people who oppose what I was trying to do did is they really, really wanted me to go into the specific weeds on this. And then you talk a lot about lots of details, and then people get confused, and then they lose sight of the fact that these weapons are designed. I would define an assault weapon as a military or military style weapon, which is designed to easily kill as many people as possible. Now I'll get to the specifics, I promise. But the heart of the difference between a shotgun, which shoots pellets and might be good for birding, or a handgun, which might be good for self-defense, or a rifle, which has sustained, it allows you to aim very carefully and shoot at a deer or something like that. The goal of an assault weapon is the same as the goal of military weapons. How can you kill as many humans as quickly as possible and defend yourself against someone trying to stop you? Again, very, very useful for the military, not a really good idea for citizens. So now we get into the details. First of all, a machine gun. A machine gun is a fully automatic weapon, which means you pull the trigger and bullets shoot out faster than certainly my hands can go. Many a second. They have those strips. You saw them in World War II, right? I mean, they going through, casings flying everywhere. Machine guns were legal in the United States until the 1930s. You may, if you studied the Prohibition and the gangsters, and they were called gangsters then, Machine Gun Kelly, that was his nickname. Or Dillinger, right? You've seen those photos from Chicago where a guy walks into a restaurant and everyone falls to the floor, and there's gun holes and okay. So those first started being regulated by the federal government in the 1930s, and then the regulation. I won't go into all the details. They've been more regulated since. They're actually still not illegal. They're just highly regulated. And what's interesting is that I can't seem to recall a mass shooting from a machine gun in the last 40 or 50 years. There may have been one, but unlike these mass shootings that we see that are occurring, several times a year now, it used to be once in 10 years, once in 1 year, now it's several times a year. Those are not done with machine guns or fully automatic weapons. They're done with assault weapons, which, again, there's different definitions, but I would define, and my law defined it, as a semi-automatic weapon with certain characteristics. Okay, what's a semi-automatic weapon? Well, an automatic weapon, you pull your finger and it immediately shoots all over. A semi-automatic weapon gives one bullet every time I can pull my finger. Now, if you can see, I can pull my finger several times within a second. They still do a lot of damage. In fact, in the military, when they train you, they don't train with fully automatic weapons, and they're very rarely use their full burst spray, they call it. They use semi-automatic weapons because it's actually easier to kill more people with a semi-automatic weapon than an automatic weapon. Why? If you shoot 100 bullets in 7 seconds, yeah, you'll kill everyone you can spray in that quick time. But if you want to go and get someone under a desk or hiding in a theater I'm sorry to give you the killer's perspective, but hiding under a theater, hiding in a seat, hiding in the classroom, you do one burst and you're out of ammunition in 10 seconds. But able to kill, boom, 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 selective fire is really good if you want to assassinate a lot of people very quickly. Now, lots of guns are semi-automatic. All semi-automatic means is that you don't have to cock it before you shoot it. So again, lots of detail. I'm sorry, it's a detailed question. But a handgun, you have to, a revolver, you have to cock it back and then shoot it, right? Some of those bolt action rifles, right? You do this and it releases the casing and then you shoot it. What a semi-automatic weapon does is it uses the power of the bullet you just fired to reload the next bullet. So it's as simple as pulling my finger back each time I can shoot a bullet. Not all semi-automatic weapons are banned. What was banned is, and it gets really technical here, but the ones that allow sustained easy fire. So things that allow stability so that it's easier to shoot one bullet after bullet after bullet after bullet. Now a rifle is pretty stable because you can rest it on your shoulder, but so it's semi-automatic with certain, and again, I don't know how technical I want to get because this gets really technical, but allows it to have the ease of use to kill a lot of people quickly. And then there's a bunch of technicalities. I can go to further detail, but I don't want to drown you in detail because I want you to understand the general purpose of defining these weapons as assault weapons. What they don't include, all right, is a weapon where you have to cock it and shoot it. It's not semi-automatic. They don't include, a simple rifle that's used for hunting. They don't include a simple handgun like a revolver. But the main thing that we did with the bill, and again, I'm sorry because it's really detailed, but I can go into a lot of detail, is that we really wanted to ban the high capacity magazines. That's really what we were after. In fact, our bill did not take away anyone's assault weapon. You could keep your AK-47. You could keep your AR-15. If you liked your military style weapon, you could keep it, but you couldn't keep your 100 bullet drum. You couldn't keep your 30 bullet magazine. You could kill 12 people, but not 13 without having to exchange your magazine. And in that 1 second, allow someone to jump on you and possibly knock it out of your hands. So, for people that said they wanted to hunt, I said, if you can't shoot a deer in 12 bullets, that deer gets a free walk home, right? I mean, hunting's supposed to be a sport. Frankly, the deer probably ran after bullet 3. And if 13 people are coming to invade your home at the same time, you're probably the bad guy, because burglaries aren't usually committed by a roving band of 15 people. It's 1, maybe 2, maybe 3 people in your home. So it was the high capacity magazines that we were largely after. I'm sorry to give all this detail. I can actually give more detail, but I don't want to drown everyone. But it is a complicated question, which is why I think it's asked. But it's still important to recognize they're not useful for self-defense. They're not useful for hunting. They are, however, very useful if you want to commit mass murder, which is why we want to restrict their sale.
Okay.
David?
Yeah, Paul and Julie, quickly, and then I want to get on to the next question.
Yeah, I just wanted to point out that what happened in Las Vegas was sort of the equivalent of an automatic weapon because of the use of the bump stock. And so the worst mass shooting in American history did have the combination of these semi-automatic assault rifles combined with the bump stock to increase the ability to just massively attack people, pointing out the frightening potential of these weapons. It should also be pointed out that the NRA was surprisingly in favor of restricting automatic weapons and in favor of those restrictive laws back when they were first passed. The NRA was a very different organization. It began in New York City. In today's Outlook section of the Post, there's a whole section on the myths of the NRA, which is quite interesting. I didn't know it was basically a New York City organization dedicated to improving the aim of soldiers after past experiences. So, but of course it evolved in a way that we know it today, and its frightening format as it evolved. But when it first started, it actually believed in preventing those kind of weapons from being used to kill a mass number of people.
Okay.
Where that went today.
Thanks. Julie, did you have anything to add, or should we move on?
Yeah, I just wanted to add one thing about the capacity to shoot a lot of bullets very fast. I think that's the defining feature of what we call a military style weapon, is that it has the detachable magazine that's capable of holding more than about 12 bullets. I wanted to just add a little anecdote. A very good friend of mine was a survivor of the Tucson shooting where Gabby Giffords was, and she and 2 other people, she's a little old lady, and she and 2 men, when the shooter went to replace his magazine, they tackled him and they kept him from shooting more than 12 bullets. And it's very real what the difference of a larger magazine makes.
Thanks.
It happened in Nashville too. A guy tackled someone as he was changing the magazine in the Waffle House.
Yes,
saved a lot of lives that way.
Thank you.
Okay. Question from Karen Parkin to anybody. What are the statistics on suicide between states with, she said, robust gun control legislation? I assume robust would include the types of measures that Virginia has adopted, including red flag laws and whatnot. What are the statistics on suicide between states that already have had robust gun legislation and states like Virginia before this last session? Is there a difference in suicide levels?
I can go first. I don't know the exact numbers. I don't have them in front of me, but I do know there are two particular laws that are very effective in lowering rates of suicides. One of them is the extreme risk protection law, which is much more effective in preventing suicides than it is in preventing mass shootings. And it's almost too early to know because these laws are so new. But the other one that's very effective is the waiting period. As I said, most people, about half of people decide to, within 10 minutes of when they decide to commit suicide, actually commit the act. And if you don't have a gun in the home, or if you have to go out, request a gun and wait 2 days for it, your likelihood of actually committing suicide plummet.
Okay.
I would just briefly say I've seen a lot of these statistics, and you'll find that states with high rates of gun ownership and states with low rates of gun regulation invariably have both more homicides and suicides. I always ask people if they can figure out what is the safest state in the United States from gun violence. And it's actually a lot, most people don't guess it, but there's a logical reason for it. And the safest state, think about it in your mind, what do you think is the safest state? The answer is
Wyoming.
Hawaii. And the reason it's Hawaii is because unlike Illinois, Chicago passes tough gun laws and all the guns come from Indiana, or DC passes tough gun laws and all the guns come from Virginia. It's really hard to get a gun to Hawaii. You can't take it on a plane, and you really can't take it on a cruise ship. So unless you got your own boat to Hawaii, you really can't go gun trafficking there. They've got very strong gun laws and virtually no shootings. Hawaii is a very safe place for gun violence.
And that's why federal laws are so important.
Exactly.
Laws are great. Federal laws are what we need.
So let me just offer another thought about this. In speaking with, on a confidential basis with a sheriff in Florida, he described to me how many people, quite a few people, fly to his county to commit suicide because they don't want to be around their families in their home states. And the ERPO law that was passed in Florida has been an enormous benefit to him in trying to forestall those suicides. So, you know, he gets word from family members that there might be a concern that they might have a gun. He's able to intervene, and he's done that quite a bit in his county. So that's another factor in all this.
Okay, I've got a couple of questions going back to the topic of assault weapons. This is as much for Mark as anybody, and let me make it in two parts. First, can you explain the opposition to the bill, particularly by Democrats in the state Senate that voted to block the bill? And secondly, would you, going back at this, perhaps in the next session, are you going to consider filing separate legislation directly to prohibit the sale of high-capacity detachable magazines and place limits on the amount of ammunition that that people can buy?
The second question first, I'm more than happy to do that. It's really just a part of what my bill did. And the reason actually it was all put together was because it was one of the governor's bills. 99% of bills that I introduce, I craft. But when you got the governor's bill, the governor has a large say in how it's crafted. But yeah, I'm certainly perfectly fine in separating the bill into its component parts. You know, the bill banned bump stocks, had a bunch of things that actually weren't controversial in it. So I think that's a good strategy for next year. To the first question, why didn't the bill pass? Well, not for my lack of trying, I assure you. People are always surprised when the reason that laws don't pass has nothing to do with policy and everything to do with politics. I'm sorry, that's just the nature of what happened here. And so I'm going to go a little bit more into the weeds, but you want to know the inside scoop on what happened here, I will tell you. I was there. I know all the details. It all begins with Dick Saslaw introducing a bill in November or December before session that was far more stringent than my bill. It banned assault weapons. It required them all to be handed over. It made it a felony if you didn't hand it over. There was no so-called grandfather clause to keep your weapons in. It was a very tough bill, and you know, I sure he introduced it for good reasons. I mean, frankly, I would have supported Dick Saslaw's bill, but it was much more, I won't say extreme, let's just say much stronger than mine. And in doing so, it drew all the opposition. And even to this day, a year later, people criticize my bill. You're going to make us felons. You're going to take people. My bill didn't affect people who currently had assault weapons. It just said you couldn't buy new ones. But because Senator Sasla introduced this very strong bill, before I even got mine in the hopper, the impressions of that bill colored and frankly really harmed my fight. So again, I think he meant well, but strategically it was a really bad idea. Okay, number two, a number of senators, particularly Chap Peterson, decided at the outset, said so publicly, said so privately, he was not going to allow more than about 3 gun bills through. He thought all these gun bills was way too much. We didn't need 8, 3, maybe 4, and that was pushing it. That was the most he was going to do. So he was going to do the easy ones, background checks. 95% of Americans or so support background checks. The extremist protective orders are maybe supported by 70%. They're going to do the easy ones, not the hard ones. Assault weapons ban is only supported by 57% of Virginians, and about 57% of Americans. Still a clear majority, but not the 95% levels universal background checks. So he, when the Senate is one senator away from, and we would have gotten the lieutenant governor's votes, but it wasn't just Chap Peterson, right? There are 3 rural senators, 3 senators in Virginia that represent largely rural areas. And they are Cree Deeds, Linwood Lewis, and John Edwards. And frankly, the 3 of them, I more respect their opposition. We are politicians. We do have to get reelected. And the 3 of them represent districts that probably don't support an assault weapons ban. Probably if you polled the 3 senators in the rural districts, their citizens probably wouldn't support it. I'm less sympathetic to Chap Peterson because I know his district and I know that people overwhelmingly support the gun measures. It's just personal to Chap. Chap hates these bills. And if you disagree with him, please let him know that, because I disagree with him too, very strongly on this. And he's not representing his district here. Now, when you're elected representative, sometimes you have to go against the will of your district. If you feel really strongly about it, Senator Peterson feels really strongly about it. I strongly disagree with him. But they made this announcement early on as a way to say, don't even bring it to us. Don't even let it cross the door. I and the Speaker of the House, Eileen Fillicorn, and the Governor, Ralph Northam, and Brian Moran, Secretary of Public Safety, we felt it was very important to get this bill through. And we thought if we got it through the House, that maybe we could twist some arms in the Senate to get it done. We did get it through the House, and it was the toughest vote. The other bills passed much more easily. This one was tough, but we did get it through the House. And I played a large role in that. And in doing so, we even watered down the bill further to get it through the House. It was no longer a felony. It would be a misdemeanor. From the get-go, you want your gun, you could keep your gun. I said that. You don't have to give up your assault weapon. You just can't buy new ones. We watered down the bullet limit. It was 10. We watered it down to 12. We allowed you to have I forget what my mind's going. The pointy thing at the end of a gun. Yeah. Sorry, the thing you use in battle, the spear at the end of a gun. A bayonet. Thank you. I'm like, it's not bazooka, it's bayonet. You can have a bayonet. Now, why anyone needs a bayonet, I don't know. But on the other hand, a bayonet is a large knife. So, okay, we're not going to ban knives. You can have your bayonet. Again, where are you going to hunt with your bayonet? A deer? Okay, but fine. Right, you want your bayonet. We don't see a lot of mass shootings with guns with bayonets. Have your bayonet. So we watered it down, but by the time we watered it down, you still hear people today saying, Mark, you wanted to make me a felon. No, I didn't. Read the damn bill. It says a misdemeanor. But again, the perceptions of the earlier bill infected this one. And I think a lot of the senators felt Mark's bill has been so badly infected by Dick Saslaw's bill that until we come back in a future year, they actually didn't kill the bill. They postponed it for a year. They carried it over for a year. We could still consider it next year. I think the thought was next year, people won't think it's the same bill as Dick Saslaw's bill. And for that political reason, even people who would otherwise support the assault weapons bill, and I think this was Scott Serval, again, you should ask him, it's his vote. But his thought was, I think he does support an assault weapons ban, but he felt like that politically it didn't make sense because of the confusion with the other bills. So again, that's a lot of inside baseball, but I was there, I played the game, and I know how it was played. So I hope that answers the question.
Another, may I speak now? Another insight is I also went and visited Chap Peterson on MLK Day when we weren't supposed to be there. And if you live in his district, I encourage you to please talk to him. I came to him and I started talking to him, and he said something and I responded, and he turned his back and walked away. So that's not what you call good representation. And the other thing that amazes me is Cree Deeds, who, like you say, is in a very rural district, even though he's a Democrat. His son, you may remember, committed suicide with a gun. So it's amazing to me that he isn't more on board with gun violence prevention measures.
Okay.
One last thing, I'm sorry. I just on the assault weapons ban, Chad Peterson, who said we weren't gonna get more than 3 or 4 gun bills through, we got 7 out of the 8, and we got another 3 that I mentioned. I think, and again, and I sort of said this before, kind of like the feint at Normandy, so much attention was directed toward my assault weapons bill that we actually really did sneak some other bills through. So I do think that in making such a fuss over it, it did help. They couldn't make a fuss over red flag laws and these other really good bills that got passed. So I actually think it was a very useful strategic maneuver, even though it didn't succeed. And of course, I'm coming back. Sorry.
Okay.
Go ahead, Dave.
Thanks, sure. The assault weapon issue really sends people off, to say the least. It's a very polarizing and misunderstood issue, I think. Okay, question for the group. This may be as much Paul and Julie. 2 parts and in sort of a list form. Which organizations are your primary opponents? And in sort of bullet form, what are their 2 major points of opposition? You might want to separate out the I'll call it the hardware issue from the health, from the taking guns away for the prevention issue. That's my distinction. Nobody else's. But if you could list the top organizations and their 2 major points. Julie?
Like me to go first? Yeah,
sure.
That's easy. Obviously, it's the NRA, who used to be a reasonable organization to support hunters and so forth. And now they are completely owned by the very wealthy gun lobbies, and they don't want any kind of limitations. And any gun that's sold is a profit for them. You'll notice, however, that they have been incredibly silent over police violence against Black people. They were also completely silent when a Black man was stopped by a policeman and said, I'm carrying a gun, and he was shot. I'll leave that one there. And the other one that we have in Virginia is the Virginia Citizens Defense League. They too are pretty hardcore, that they don't believe in any kind of laws. Their leader, Phil Van Cleve, is kind of infamous for being on the Daily Show. And when somebody said that Australia only had 3 mass shootings before they stopped, said whoop-de-doo. These people are complete extremists in their views. On our side, there are very, very, very few of us that believe in complete gun control, so that nobody has guns. Whereas on this side, they believe everybody should have a gun.
I would just add to that Van Cleve was caught on camera by a satirist who offered the idea of arming children, actually
Yes.
toddlers, and he was all
That's
for
Baron
it.
Cohen, right?
Yes.
Yes.
And so I think nothing need more be said about his perspective than watching that video, which I urge everyone to do because it will stun and shock you if you have not seen it.
It's a kindergarten or something. Kindergarten, yeah.
So yeah, there are definitely people out there who don't understand what we're trying to do here. But it's true. We are not going. We have so many weapons and so many guns in the hands of American citizens now. They've been buying them in even larger numbers during this current crisis. Somehow thinking perhaps that they can shoot the virus. I'm not sure exactly what their focus on that is, but regardless, the number of background checks have gone up considerably as well because of that. And the strain on the system is one that needs to be helped. We need to provide more funding to be able to manage that system because there are so many guns being purchased and background checks being done, even though not everybody who belongs in the system is in the system to be stopped. But this is something most Americans still actually agree on. In the 90s, it's in the 90 percentile and plus in all the polling that shows that America is fed up with this, that we want reasonable reforms. We need to keep guns out of unsafe hands. We are being blocked by a handful of legislators due to perhaps their particular ideologies or the funds that they're receiving for their campaigns. It's hard to speculate about people's particular reasons, but bottom line is that I want to just take a moment here to applaud the people of the state of Virginia, the people of our Commonwealth who came together and demanded change, voted for change, and the hope that we all have has been effectuated. We've seen change in our state. Change can come in our country when people vote. And I think people have to remember that every day as they deal with the latest crises that we face.
Mark, if I might ask to just change the question slightly for you, who do you see in opposition, or maybe they don't come to your door because they know who you are?
Oh no, they come to my door, literally.
But do any of the groups that come to your door have specific refutations of the types of data and assertions that Julie and Paul have made and about the issue of gun violence, need to take guns away from to regulate, to take guns away from people who present an active danger to themselves and families and whatnot? So
I have been kind of a lightning rod in Virginia on this issue, particularly this session. I have, frankly, for years. In fact, a couple of years ago, I reacted quite strongly to the shootings in, I forget which one, because I get all the mass shootings confused. I don't know if it was the one in Florida or Newtown, but I said, these shootings are happening because we don't have these gun bills. Anyway, Republicans got so mad at me, they actually decided to kill all my other bills, my bill on animal vaccinations, my bill on allowing the Gadsby Tavern to have an alcohol license. I mean, really completely unrelated bills, because they were so angry at my rhetoric on why Republicans were allowing these shootings to happen. That's how visceral this is for some of the opponents. Interestingly, by the way, all those other bills did get through because they were quite popular, but that was their goal. I've now talked with literally hundreds, probably thousands of people who disagree with me. They troll my Facebook page. They get me on Twitter. They get me in person. I did a debate on guns before the Western Conservative PAC in Denver a few years ago. That's the largest one after CPAC, and there were literally 3,000, 4,000 people in the room, all disagreeing with me, and I'm there debating this Fox News host on guns. So I've been around the folks. Now, 80 to 90% of the people who disagree with me on gun issues, it is emotional and personal and cultural. So it's, you're trying to take away my guns. It's we have to have guns in case the government becomes tyrants, and we need to do Lexington and Concord all over again and attack the government and use our guns to defeat the U.S. military. I never quite understood that, but it's visceral. A lot of people say, that's what the purpose of the Second Amendment is. It's to keep the government from taking over, and they don't seem to understand that tanks are a lot more powerful than their AR-15s. But I would say 10% of the criticism, and it's really nasty and really ugly, and they call me all kinds of names that I won't repeat, and there's even been a few physical threats, all of which I've reported to the police, and as I said, a gunman did come to my home. About 10%, I would say, have rational, logical critiques. A few I agree with, most I disagree with, but at least come at me with proposals. And their critiques, the reasonable ones I consider reasonable, are things like, hey, Mark, I live out in the country. The police can't come to my rural area where I live. When you call the police in Alexandria, they come in a minute or two. Where I live in Grundy, it can take 45 minutes for the police to come to my door. I need a gun. And that's why I say to them, I'm not trying to ban you from having a gun in your home. I'm not trying to ban you from having a shotgun or a handgun. They think I am, but I'm not. Their critique is reasonable. They just misunderstand what we are trying to do. And then I have people who tell me, I think the more honest people tell me, this is fun. I like to shoot at targets. It's cool. Come out and shoot with me sometime. Grab an AR-15. You'll see how easy and fun it is. So I went out in January with one of these people who very reasonable guy, and I shot, 20 different kinds of guns. And yes, I shot an AR-15. And I found out that I'm actually a pretty good shot, which surprised me. I thought maybe I'm a liberal and I hate guns. Maybe that doesn't mean I shoot well. Apparently there's no connection. You can still shoot well. And I played enough video games that I can sort of, estimate a target. Apparently I'm a good shot. And they're like, well, hey, wasn't that fun? I'm like, I prefer the video game, it's a lot more interactive. And, but I can see why people like it. And honestly, the most fun I had that day was I shot a watermelon and blew it up, and it was cool. It was cool. Boom, right? That brings out the 8-year-old boy in me. So I get that it's fun. I do. I've even thought about ways to regulate it. Like you could say that an assault weapon could be left at a gun range in a safe. And if the gun range allows it to leave, they would be held liable, because I don't really care if people have assault weapons at gun ranges. I mean, if you're there and someone shoots you there, it's kind of assumption of risk. I don't want them to take it off the gun range. So the guns are fun, people. I actually have even tried to accommodate them. The people who say, well, everyone needs a gun, because, some of this I really feel like is, it's psychological. We used to allow guns in the chamber of the House of Delegates. That was just changed this year. We allowed them in the visitors gallery. And I remember asking one of my Republican colleagues, one of my friends, and I said to him, how can you allow these guns? Because we tried to change the rules and failed. How can you allow them in the visitors gallery? He said, Mark, I got a gun in my desk at the General Assembly. I said, I know you do, but you can't tell me that you're busy scanning the visitors gallery every moment. You're looking at legislation, you're voting, you're casting your votes. You're not, if you're spending your whole day watching the visitors gallery, you're going to cast all your votes wrong. He said, no, you're right. I'm not doing that. But Mark, if a guy were to come in with a gun and start spraying this gallery, they would start with your side of the aisle first. And he was joking, but I don't know that he was joking. It's the kind of joke that's like, anyway, that's one of the first things we did. But in the debate on whether or not to ban guns from our visitors gallery, people actually made the argument. Rob Bell stood up and made the argument, Mark, people need to feel safe, and they can't walk from the parking lot, which is across the street from the General Assembly, and their police across the street, because someone could mug them in the parking garage, so they need to have a gun by their side. And I think a lot of gun owners, and I don't even want to say most of them, because I don't think it is most of them, but some gun owners think of a gun as a shield. They think it's this little force field around them. And if you have a gun, no one can shoot you. Well, what any real gun owner knows is that the killer always has the element of surprise. I don't care if you have a gun in your parking gallery. If the gunman, the killer, is hiding behind a car, they can still shoot you and kill you long before you get your gun. Guns are not shields, and they don't magically protect you from being shot. And I just think a lot of this is psychological. I hope I can go on, but I hope that gives you some idea of what I've faced with discussing this with folks.
All right, let me answer a question that's in the chat room, and because I have some slight experience, and then go to data, and then we need to close out the formal program part of the program. I have a final comment, and then like that, Catherine Allen to make one. First, there's a question about why didn't the JCRC take a position in this last legislation, last decline to endorse and lobby for the assault weapons bill, to be specific. The JCRC, I know I've become quite familiar with my activity through the JCC, does include gun control in the list of issues that they take when they have their day in Richmond and go talk to lobbyists. Over the last year, the JCRC has not had an active person covering the Virginia legislature, our JCRC. The JCRCs in Richmond and Tidewater and whatnot have, but the person who was, they simply had a lack of personnel, and there have been a few issues that could have used a little more oomph from our JCRC, but they just didn't have the manpower. There was one involving a security law that was under consideration that we actively pushed them towards, but there's just a manpower issue. Let me pose the data. There are a couple of data questions, and I'll pose them both, and then we'll go to the final. One, does the state of Virginia collect data on the use of guns in police reported instances of domestic abuse? And if so, what is the correlation? And the second data question is, what data do we have in a decrease in gun violence in a state with active gun ownership like Virginia after they passed laws and intended to limit risk? There were other questions about, frankly, that fall under the rubric of, with as many guns in private hands as there are in the United States, is our gun control laws really effective? Can they be effective? Is the gist? But one is specifically use of guns in police report instances, domestic abuse, and do these laws actually have an effect?
So we don't have enough data. We actually, as much as we did on gun legislation this year, passing the 7 governor's bills and another 3 very important bills. For example, I had 2 more bills, gun bills that didn't get heard. There were probably 30 or 40 gun bills that didn't get heard. The thought of our leadership, particularly after some bills filled the Senate, was we've done a lot this year. Let's table those till next year. But data collection is one very important thing that we need. We do have national data that shows that, as I said, if a gun's in your home, it's 5 times more likely to be used against you or someone in your homes than an intruder. So a lot of those are domestic violence. There's lots and lots of studies you can look that find out there that show that that cases of domestic violence tend to lead to death when there's a gun in the home, and when there's not in the home, they're still brutal, but they don't tend to kill. So there's a lot of data on the connections in guns and domestic violence. The second question you raise is whether any of these gun laws work. We have more guns per capita than almost any country in the world. I think we're 3 or 4% of the world's population, and we have like 25% of the world's guns, something like that. You'll have to look it up, but it's something like that. Does it do any good? And I think the answer is it does do good with a lag time. It doesn't do good tomorrow. July 1st, a lot of these laws are going to go into effect on July 1st. Do I think that gun violence in Virginia is going to go down July 2nd? Probably not. There is a lag time. The clearest example of that is the machine guns, right? There were lots and lots of mass murders with machine guns in the 1920s and 1930s. The law happened in 34, 35. Did they suddenly end? No, but they dramatically decreased over time, over decades. until now we have virtually no mass shootings with machine guns. The assault weapons ban, that's a great example because it's more recent. 1994, mass shootings went down. Now, I told you they went down about 40%. If you say, well, only 40%? Yeah, only 40%. So it's still hundreds and thousands of lives. That's a good thing. But yeah, I don't dismiss the questioner's point that because there are so many guns, these new laws don't end gun violence tomorrow. You want to, again, you go to Japan or go to Hawaii, because we don't have a federal answer, but they do work and they will take time, and there are no magic solutions, but they save lives. And I remember a guy on TV when I talked about my bill banning bump stocks, and I was the first legislator in Virginia to call for banning bump stocks right after, I did it the day after the Las Vegas massacre. And the guy said to me, bump stocks, they kill like 50 people a year out of the 40,000 that die by guns. Why even do this? And I said, because I think 50 lives matter. Because I think that those people wish they were alive. Because I think their family members wish they were alive because they shouldn't have been killed. And the guy, there's a guy on a TV program, had sort of a stunned look on his face. And I'm like, yeah, these are real lives. No, I don't pretend that we're going to end gun violence tomorrow. But if we can dramatically reduce gun violence and save lives, if it's not 40,000, if we only save 10,000, right? I mean, what is it, Sodom, right? If I can save one life, a God, right? I mean, a life, I think it's the Talmud that says, if you save a life, you save the world. So, there are no panacea. Well, Mark, this particular gun law would not have stopped that particular gun massacre. Point made. But it would have stopped that gun massacre. So people demanding perfection from us, I look at it the other way. If we can save a life, let's do it.
Let me, David, if I may. We know that the NRA has worked very hard over the years to prevent us from tracking and gathering information at a federal level. Now that we have more state control here in Virginia, for instance, we need to make a commitment to doing the kind of tracking and a gathering of data that can be of great assistance to us. And let's take the Extreme Risk Protection Order law, for instance. That law is designed so that only law enforcement officials can go to the courts to seek a protection order, but they're going to get requests from the public. And we need to know how many people in the public are reaching out to make those requests. We need to know what happens to those requests. We need to have a way to follow that up and follow that trail all the way to the end to see what happened, in order for us to make a proper assessment of the law, its effectiveness, and how we can improve it. That's something that every state needs to do. Most states are not doing that very well. And it's a new law. As I said, we're going to be the 18th state with this law. We can set an example for other states by working on this issue. And I hope that our Attorney General and other people in our government will work very hard to make sure that we have thorough data as we move forward with this law starting July 1st.
If I can add another point on the question of whether gun laws work. Unfortunately, we don't have too many federal gun laws, so it's hard to look at on a federal level. We do know that states that have stronger gun laws have about 40% lower domestic violence rates. I think people who commit domestic violence don't usually deal in traffic guns. They usually buy their guns legally. And to me, that's a tremendous benefit. And as far as the ERPO laws, I do know the extreme risk laws, the red flag laws. I don't know the numbers, but I do know that the suicide rates are down considerably. And I'm with Mark, to save a single life is to save the entire world. And to save 10,000 lives is 10,000 universes.
Thanks.
We're all in agreement there.
I do know that there are several university centers that do collect data that may be different from the federal. My alma mater, Johns Hopkins School of Public Health, it is one of the lead. The lead professor is fellow whose name most people won't forget is Daniel Webster.
Right.
But you may, if you're interested, you may want to go to the public health website, look him up, and look at the center, because they do have very active statistics. Let me add one other note in closing, then turn it over to Catherine Allen. First, I want to thank my fellow members of the panel for sharing your knowledge and expertise. Thank everybody for the questions. There are still questions, you can still hang around. There are very good questions in the chat box. There is also very good information that were not in the form of questions from Les Bergen and Andrew Cohen in particular. Let me take a personal moment. Over the last 2 years with the JCC, we've had some challenges regarding security. We have hired a director of security. There is a security and guns discussion go together, although they are not synonymous. Security covers a much wider range of issues. But when we've had our public forums and discussions, we encounter a wide range of strongly held opinions, which range from give everybody a gun when they walk in the door and nobody will shoot, which sounds vaguely like an Archie Bunker episode from the 70s about hijacking planes, to no way, no how. The issue of having armed guards is very contentious, and complicated, and I'm happy to talk to anybody about it privately. And with that, let me turn over to Catherine.
Thanks very much, David, for your efforts to moderate this in more than capable manner. I also want to, on behalf of the Social Action Committee, thank our panelists, Delegate Mark Levine, Executive Director Paul Friedman, our very own Julie Keller. Very grateful to all of you for participating and informing us so ably. Finally, a thank you to the Men's Club for partnering with us to arrange this important conversation, and to all of you who came and participated and asked such detailed and insightful questions. So I'll just take this opportunity to sum up quickly with a particular angle on implications for us individually. I think all of our panelists today shared important things that we can consider doing ourselves to live out the principle of pikuach nefesh, preservation of life, specifically to reduce gun death in this country and in our state and communities. Julie mentioned a number of groups that can amplify our voices, both faith-based groups and not, and I'm sure she is more than happy to talk to anyone who is looking for ideas of ways to get involved in some of these groups. Paul spoke about how his organization acts on the importance of sound implementation of the existing laws and trying to keep guns out of the wrong hands. And I want to just take a note that I really appreciated how both of you spoke to the interaction of this issue with our country's racial history and the current concerns of communities of color. I think that's a really important thing to keep in mind, particularly at this time. Finally, Mark spoke about the role of state regulation, consistent with the Heller decision, in preventing needless deaths. And so this is a very key angle for us as citizens, because we have a responsibility to come to forums like this and educate ourselves about the issues, the bills in front of our representatives, and then share our views on them. And I'm going to sound like a broken record on this in every single social action event that we hold this year, but vote, vote, vote. Doesn't matter what your political leaning is, it's critical. Finally, if you're looking to do more, I urge you to get involved. Our committee can do more, only with more people. And so please visit our website for the Social Action Committee of Agudas Achim Congregation. We have a Facebook page and we have an email newsletter that you can sign up for to get regular notifications, both about our events and also our committee meetings. The next committee meeting is this Thursday night, and we would love to see you there. We always welcome new faces. So with that, I will say thank you once more. And I guess we will move on to the next phase of this discussion.
Thanks, Elliot. Are you going to unmute everybody? People can stay or people can go, but I am not moderating.
Well, first I want to apologize. I think I said Moses in Sodom and Gomorrah. I meant Abraham. So I just want to make sure that that you know that